Who are we, you ask? We are the podcast seeking out a better understanding of all things paranormal. We'll have guests from all backgrounds in the paranormal with us along this journey, with Q&As for listeners to ask paranormal experts their questions, and open call-in nights to let listeners discuss their thoughts and experiences on the paranormal. But the question remains, can the unexplained be explained? Or can the paranormal be nothing more than perception? So, close the curtains and turn out the lights and join us on the journey into the paranormal. This is Paranormal Engaged with your host, Adam Young, coming to you from the beautiful Evergreen State.
And welcome back to Paranormal Engaged. I hope everybody had a wonderful and safe 4th of July. Thanks for tuning in with us again today. And we have Don Allison here with us to share his experiences. And as a daily newspaper editor, Don was used to uncovering the straight facts. And these mysteries were nothing short of mind-boggling. He started to research his paranormal experiences and learned that they are quite common. He had further paranormal encounters at the iconic Civil War battlefield of Gettysburg. At the urging of his wife and coworkers, he reluctantly wrote a book about his experience called I Met a Ghost at Gettysburg, a journalist's journey into the paranormal. Don, thanks for coming in and sharing your experience with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine, and thanks for the opportunity.
So, Don, you have been a professional writer since the mid-1970s. Yet your first book on the paranormal, I Met a Ghost at Gettysburg, a journalist's journey into the paranormal, was published 3 years ago. Why tackle this topic now?
Up until fairly recently, I would never have dreamed of tackling the topic. I was skeptical to the point of being almost antagonistic, regarding the paranormal. It just, in my mind, was people with overactive imaginations, maybe wanting things to happen, and I really put no credence into it until it happened to me.
So, you say you were reluctant to share your personal encounters. What changed your mind?
I just finally had so many things happen, and one incident in particular just really kind of broke the floodgates open for me that I really need to share this. And it happened in Gettysburg, and actually the title of the book is about that very encounter. I had taken my grandson to Gettysburg, not for the paranormal, but for the history, and I'd registered as a journalist. That allowed us to get some behind-the-scenes looks at places like the Visitor Center, some other things, but I was offered a free paranormal investigation. And I thought, well, I wanted my grandson to have a good time, so I threw that out at him, and he thought, yeah, that sounds like fun, Grandpa. I thought it would be a total touristy thing. I didn't think there was any credence to the thing, but we were taken to Sachs Bridge at Gettysburg, and I was not aware until this investigation that actually was one huge field hospital area, and the bridge was used by the Confederates in their retreat. But at the very end of the evening, which I found rather unremarkable to our investigation, at first the bridge was crowded. We were getting nothing. We used K2 meters, laser grids, and the little SB7 ghost boxes, for transcommunication. And at the very end, we finally had the bridge to ourselves. We started getting answers to questions on the ghost box. The investigator asked, "Well, is anyone with us?" And she'd been asking that, and we finally got a yes. And she said, "Well, how many are with us?" 7, 8, 9, and a few other answers, and I'm just wondering. This really took me by surprise. Well, this all died off. It was the end of the night, so we thought. So she went to start the car. It was a cool early spring night. And just out of the blue, I thought, okay, if this really, one of the things we got was that the year was 1863. So I'm thinking, if these are soldiers coming across here, what would get them going? So I said, do you like jokes? Got a very polite yes, sir. That was intriguing. So I said, do you like music? And it was almost as if the whatever we were communicating with was insulted, and said, of course. And my grandson, quick thinking, said, can you play for us? And he said, absolutely. And we started getting music, period, guitar music, acoustic guitar. And I'm just thinking, I thought it was a hoax. I really was just trying to figure out how they were pulling this off. The investigator came back, and her eyes just opened wide. Her mouth was open. She's just staring at the spirit box. And this music continued, and it obviously was not part of the blips that you'll get. You know, these work, of course, through scanning of radio stations. You might get a blip of music or hear a quick, something from a DJ. But this was measures and measures. And when it finally died off, I asked her, I said, wow, you're good. And the voice said, thank you. And I said, can you play some more? And absolutely. And it started playing again. This time we got mandolin and harmonica kicking in.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, these hoaxers are good. But then when the music faded out, the investigators asking some questions. How many of you are still with us? And I think the answer is more like 6 or 7. I forget exactly. It's in the book. But she asked, can you give us your name? And we got a 3-syllable name. It was rather hard to make out the first and last syllables. The middle syllable was quite clear, was on. And on. And she kept saying, can you enunciate more clearly? And it's like this voice was straining to be understood. And we could make out the on, the kind of sounded like kind of a hard S sound at the end. But anyway, we're asking other things, and we got an answer to, how old are you? 20. Repeated it like 3 times, and then it said, unsolicited, captain. Like, boy, this really wanted known. And I'm still thinking, how are they pulling this off? And I was asking, well, where are you from? What state? We couldn't understand it. So I started running down states. When I said Ohio, we got a clear yes. And I said, my grandson and I are from Ohio. The K2s we each had one. That we'd barely been able to get a blip out of these all night. Both Connor's and mine went to the red and stayed there several seconds. The investigator with us, hers did not budge, which was rather strange.
Wow.
But we got some other answers, but at the very end of the evening, and this still kind of sends chills down my spine, the investigator asked, were you hurt? And we got just a blood-curdling male scream, just of total anguish, and then a woman crying. And we didn't get any more. Some other people came on the bridge, so we left about an hour later than what we'd intended to be there. And I went home convinced that this was a hoax, that I was going to prove it was not true, that they tried to pull a fast and get the journalists to write a good review on them is what I thought it was all about. But as I talked to people, researched, I found out now you cannot broadcast to a ghost box. And this one was behaving exactly as it was supposed to. The blips, you could adjust the speed, rate, direction, and so forth. But I thought, well, okay, were there any Ohio captains killed or mortally wounded at Gettysburg? So I started looking, and there were 7. One of them, the name was Mahlon Briggs. He was wounded on the first day, captured by the Confederates, died on the 3rd day of the battle, and he may well have died at Sachs Bridge as a prisoner.
Wow.
That rather blew my mind. Everything fit.
So, Don, would you consider when you initially went there for this paranormal investigation, would you have considered yourself like just a diehard skeptic? Just nope, I don't believe in this.
I had been having experiences at my house by this time, but I had never gone on an investigation, and I really didn't believe you could just summon things. I guess, so to speak. I would not have done this had I been on my own, and I was not expecting anything. And as these voices and the music's coming over the ghost box, my mental outlook was one of disbelief and diehard skepticism, yes. In that regard, no. These were very clear. I tried to dismiss them and, tried to say, it's our imagination, but it was not. We all 3 clearly were hearing the same things.
So, did any one incident kind of serve as your tipping point leading into, I met a ghost?
Yeah, that one really, really got me going, and things continued to happen at the house. This is a quite old house. The old part was built in 1835. It has quite a history. It was an Underground Railroad stop. We had researched the history. I'm very much into history. And we just had some rather incredible things happen. A lot of footsteps, unexplained. I mean, you'd hear a door open and someone walk across a room or through the hallway, and you would hear the door open, not close, hear the footsteps clearly, and yet when you'd look, the door was still closed and no one was there. We've had really weird electronic things, never with plug-in devices. Actually, we had no power to the house while we were working on it. We worked on it for several years before we moved in, and rewiring was part of that. But battery-powered radios and CD players would behave very strangely. Radios would come on, turn off, change stations while you're listening. Just things that really could not be explained. The weirdest one, and this one really blew my wife and I's mind, we were working outside listening to music on the radio, and the radio changed stations. This was a digital tuner to a Bowling Green State University men's basketball game. It's an area university. It's also the arch rival to my University of Toledo team. But no matter what station we put it back on, we tried putting it back on the original, it would go to that BGSU game. We tried probably a dozen times, different stations, and it would go back. We finally just looked at each other, shook our heads, left it on the game. Once the game ended, we put it back on our original station, and it stayed there. I cannot explain that.
Now, you've often mentioned that I Met a Ghost in Gettysburg was a life changer for you. So, what was it that made that the life changer?
I really didn't plan on doing anything more with the paranormal. I wrote that book as much to satisfy my wife as anything. I mean, she has gone through the experiences at the house with me. She has had experiences at Gettysburg. But I thought, as I've often done in my career, I've written books for a number of years, that yes, I'll tackle this topic. I approached it as a journalist, that I'll tackle this topic, and then I'll be done. I'll move on to something else. But the reception that book received was nothing short of phenomenal. I started getting contacted by people in the field, by, radio hosts, podcasters such as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I was on our regional public broadcasting system TV show that ended up being carried nationwide on stations, and I started getting invited to investigate haunted places with some pretty top-notch investigators.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fact that I'm a journalist, and the book very plainly states my skepticism, just opened doors. And the more that I was in contact with people, the more that I actually went to these haunted sites and saw things happen, heard things happen. I decided that, yes, this is something that I really need to explore further. And I did a sequel. I met more ghosts at Gettysburg, and I'm currently working on a third book on the paranormal that has unfortunately been delayed due to the COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
One of my primary source libraries for material has been closed since March.
Oh. So, Don, I take you as kind of a history buff. So, with your experiences with the paranormal and also along with your journalistic background, would you say that your experiences at Gettysburg has kind of enhanced your understanding of the history there of the battle?
It really has. I've always felt, and many people have commented on this, that being on the field at Gettysburg, there's a sense of, I'm not really sure how best to describe it, kind of a sense of awe that you can feel the energy that something happened here.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, my current book that I'm working on was really triggered by just some unexplained happenings that got me to look into one particular regiment's experience.
So, can you share a little bit about that experience?
Certainly, and this actually is the second time this had happened to me in my life, a similar experience. The first one happened many years ago, and I just wrote it off to having known what happened at that spot. I had been kind of short sleep researching a book, and it just was very intense traveling the route of a local Civil War regiment that suffered severe losses in this particular battle.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to a spot where a lot happened. I knew what happened there. And in my mind's eye, I kind of was almost dumbstruck. I'm seeing the battle in my mind quite clearly.
Wow.
And at that time, a friend that was with me, my co-author, actually thought something had happened to me. He said I got very white, I looked faint and unsteady on my feet, and I couldn't even answer his questions for a while. I tried to downplay it because we had a local historian as our guide, and I didn't want him to think that I was loony, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. But I did confide in my friend later. But this happened at Gettysburg. I was interested in another unit, actually, the 75th Ohio that Malin Briggs from my first book had served in. Mm-hmm. I was just curious what happened to his regiment after he was wounded. And I'm walking their position, and I noticed another of their brigade regiments. The markers for them went up a hill, and I had never been to this spot before, so I'm walking up the hill. And the same thing happened to me as it happened earlier at Jonesboro, that I saw this battle in my mind's eye. But the difference here was I had no clue what happened on this spot, none whatsoever. I saw in my mind's eye just darkness and muzzle flashes, and I could sense confusion and yelling and running. And this was a different friend with me this time, and he had the same reaction. He asked if I was what was wrong with me, what had happened. I couldn't even speak. I just was dumbfounded. He walked up to where I was at, and he told me he thought I'd had a stroke, and he was ready to call 911. But I finally regained enough of my senses and energy to be able to talk and respond, and finally was able to walk. But I wasn't right for a couple hours after that. I just was drained, and I was just kind of in shock over it. My friend is not into the paranormal. He's very skeptical, but luckily he was open, and he had visibly seen me react, so he knew something was up. Well, I went home convinced that I needed to research this one. There's the history part of me. It was the 107th Ohio Regiment, and when I started looking into them, well, first of all, backtrack a little bit. Right after I got home from that Gettysburg trip, I gave a talk to a local library on my first book. And afterward, a good friend of mine, who's also a historian, came up to me. I had mentioned being at Gettysburg. I said nothing about this experience or that regiment. And he said, Don, I don't think I've told you, but you were at Gettysburg. So I hadn't told you, but I'm researching the Ohio units that fought at Gettysburg. Did you know the 107th Ohio had a company from our county? And I was just kind of awed by that, like, wow, out of the blue, to have the same connection. But I started looking into the regiment, and what I had seen in my mind's eye is exactly what happened. They were overrun by the Louisiana Tigers shortly after sunset on the second day of the battle. I can't explain that, but it's a German regiment, and because of that, they were treated very badly. A lot of the German regiments were not highly thought of, and this particular regiment was very badly treated for nothing that they had done to deserve it, other than being very unlucky.
So, has your background as a daily newspaper editor affected the reception that you and your paranormal books receive?
I think it has, and in a way that I'd never really anticipated. People tend to take me seriously, and I don't know how many times I've had people tell me, I don't believe in this stuff, but I know you, or I know your work, and if you say it happened to you, I believe it. And I'll have to tell you, when I picked up the first printing of that book, had my van loaded with these books, and my wife was with me, and on the drive home, I'm thinking, what have I done? I could just picture speaking at groups at, say, a library, and just having people laughing at me, thinking I'd lost my mind. But that is not the case. The people who have been skeptical are few and far between, at least in terms of being antagonistic or dismissive.
Right. So, you stated that your initial plan was to write one book on the paranormal and then move on to other topics. However, your latest book, I Met a Ghost at Gettysburg, a journalist's paranormal journey continues, delves even more deeply into the topics. So, why the change in heart?
I just had so many things continuing to happen, so many new opportunities. I have been invited to take part in paranormal investigations, particularly at Gettysburg, although other places as well, and just seen and heard so many things that have just really made me become fascinated with the paranormal. And it's really opened a new world to me. I realize more and more that there's so much we do not understand. There are intelligent entities there that communicate, that can pass on information that myself and others could not have known on our own, that turns out to be verifiable. I've actually I speak at paranormal conferences and events that many paranormal researchers attend, and I've become a proponent of looking into the history of a place. And I find that is actually a form of evidence. If you're getting this information from an entity, say through a ghost box, and you can verify through the historical record
Hmm.
that this ties in, to me that is a form of evidence, giving strength to the other evidence you've received.
So, in I Met More Ghosts at Gettysburg, you write about a prejudice that exists regarding the serious research into the paranormal. Can you expand a little bit more about this?
Yes, it's kind of it's interesting because if you look at psychology many years ago, it was viewed as a pseudoscience, and many in other scientific fields poo-pooed the idea, put it down. They wouldn't accept people who were doing serious studies, thinking it's flawed because you couldn't collect, empirical evidence in quite the same way. We were dealing with the human mind, not a chemical reaction or physical property. I think parapsychology is much the same. I've talked with a number of people in the field, and they're really not widely accepted. They're often excluded. They're deemed as not being real scientists, and that is a shame because I think parapsychology really has things that to offer us.
Right. So, would you say now, as opposed to back then, and now, do you feel that the science into the paranormal and parapsychology is a little more widely accepted now as to opposed to 10 years ago?
I think, yeah, the idea that there is something there, I think, is a little more widely accepted. I know it is in the general public. I think the proliferation of some of the television shows into the paranormal has maybe helped with that. I'm also finding it interesting that quantum physics, it can be very difficult to understand, but some of the findings really are, I guess, lending some weight to paranormal research. And one that really, and this particular quantum physics experiment has been around a while. It's called the double slit
Hmm.
experiment. And in a nutshell, it's really hard to understand the specifics. I've read a lot into it. If beams of light are shined through two different slits in an opening, and say a screen or a paper against a screen in the back, light can have be both a particle and a wave, and it can vary between those two. But by doing the double slits, it mixes up. So you have kind of a combination of wave and particle.
Hmm.
But they have shown that the human mind, by simply focusing on this light coming through these slits, the human mind can choose for them to be either waves or particles. The really mind-blowing part of it is that this can be done retroactively, and that the decision, the person can decide that when the light is shined through, it is going to be a wave or going to be particles. And it actually can be done like that, which just blows away our conception of time and space.
Absolutely. It's
And,
fascinating.
and this is an experiment that can be replicated and has been replicated.
So, um, your previous works dealt with straight journalism and history, and you've said you plan to continue works in those areas. Does your writing and research into the paranormal impact your reputation or work in these fields?
I have not found that it does at all. I have since retired. Since I Met a Ghost at Gettysburg came out, I have retired from day-to-day work at the newspaper, although I still write a weekly column. But yeah, I do some other work. I actually begin to do some historical research for a living history facility nearby, and I've not found that is has impacted things. I've done book signings of. I met a ghost at Gettysburg at events with very serious Civil War historians that I've come to know through the years, and they have, as a person, been accepting of what I'm doing. A good example is, and this was a private conversation, I won't share his name, but he is a fairly well known Civil War author and involved in preservation of battlefields. And this is when I met a ghost book had first come out. He said, "You know, Don," he says, "I'm a total skeptic at this, but he said, I know if you had these experiences, I believe you." And he said, "I do have to share this." He said he was coming into Gettysburg late one night. It was a very rainy night after dark. He was with a friend, and for some reason, when they first got into town, they decided to drive along the seminary grounds where the first day's battle took place. And he said a riderless horse with a Civil War saddle blanket and saddle galloped across the road in front of them in the rain, but he said it was silent. He said if that would have been a real horse, the clatter of the shoes on the asphalt would have been quite noticeable. He said he and his friend looked at each other. "Did you see that?" "Yes." And then they drove on and said no more about it.
So, what was your goal in writing I Met More Ghosts at or in Gettysburg? And what did you hope to kind of achieve with the book?
My goal with the second book, and from here on, is maybe to educate people. I hesitate to say entertain, although I hope they will find the book interesting. But I want to open their eyes to maybe the idea that there's more to this earth and to our existence than they meet the eye,
Right.
and that they can be open to learning more about it. I just find it a very fascinating world that raises many, many, many more questions than we can begin to have answers at this point.
Right. So, one topic that you address, both in your paranormal books and that typically is not associated with the exploration of ghosts and hauntings, is dreams. Can you elaborate on why you address this?
Yes, and as I've talked more with people in the field, I have actually had a number of people in the paranormal field comment about the fact that I address dreams, and they seem to think that's underappreciated. Um, I've had some dreams in my life that are very hard to explain. One of them, I had just moved into this house. I hadn't been here very long, and I had the most vivid dream that I met my grandfather. He died in the early 70s when I was still a teenager, and we were very close, but I don't and hadn't dreamed about him very often at all. But I encountered him in downtown Bryan, the town where I live just outside of, and he was dressed all in white, which he did not dress that way. And we were outside my uncle's restaurant, and he leads me inside. Um, Very vivid dream, and it's like he was talking to me, but I didn't hear him, but I knew what was going on. We sat at a table with two ladies dressed in like probably 1950s, early 60s fashions. It's like I knew these women, but I didn't know who they were. But I'm sitting there like they're having a conversation that I understand but don't hear. Then my grandfather looked at me right in the eye and he pointed down to his crotch. And I just was taking it at the time as that he was probably telling me a dirty joke. I understood he could be a little racy at times, but he wouldn't really show that side to me very much.
Mm-hmm.
His more clean humor. But shortly after I woke up, and this dream just left an impression on me. Um, got up, I went to work, and as soon as I got to work, I got a call from my mother. And they had taken my dad into the hospital. He had a severe bladder infection that had turned to sepsis.
Oh.
And my mom is downplaying this.
Mm-hmm.
That, well, he'll be fine. You don't have to leave work. They were taking him to a larger hospital to see a specialist, and immediately I connected the dream with, pointing at his crotch, that this was serious. I said, "No, Mom, I'm leaving. I will go with you." And it ended up he very nearly died. And I was able to provide some very, very helpful service to both my mom and dad that day. And had I not had that dream, I probably would have gone with my mom's explanation that it's not that serious.
Right. So, in respect with your experiences and originally coming in as a diehard skeptic, knowing what you know now, or from your experiences, are you still taking that skeptic approach, or have you found that you're a little more open minded to it all?
I still, if something happens, the skeptic in me still jumps to the forefront. I'm very big on debunking, and I have been able to debunk a number of things. And if the scale is kind of even, is this paranormal? Is this not paranormal? I'll still go with okay. It's unverified.
Right.
So I try to, if I lay a claim that I believe this is paranormal, I want to be able to back it up with some good, solid reasoning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, in I Met a Ghost at Gettysburg, um, you expanded on your experiences you and your grandson had at the Little Round Top, but it actually led to a discovery that you actually had ancestors that fought there. Can you explain?
Yes. My wife and I had an encounter, and we were at Gettysburg. We actually honeymooned there many years ago, and we had gone back to celebrate an anniversary. And I had an odd experience with a camera that just ceased to work properly. I was trying to take pictures of the Alabama monument, which is where the Alabama Brigade formed up before they charged Little Round Top. I kept trying and trying to get a picture. I finally did. This camera did not behave that way. At any other time, we drove around to the actual Little Round Top site. The camera worked fine in between. I went to take a picture of the 20th Maine Monument, the Union Regiment that fought the 15th Alabama of my ancestors. I could not take a picture of the monument. The camera would shut off. I could turn and look down the hill and take any picture I wanted. This was just rather mind-blowing to me. And I couldn't take any picture of any Union monument on Little Round Top. The camera would turn off, but I could take other pictures. As soon as we left Little Round Top, it worked fine and never did that again. I was curious and had done a little research when my grandson were there after the Sachs Bridge experience. I thought, well, let's go to the Alabama monument. It's after dark. Also, when my wife and I had pulled up with the camera incident, the song "Sweet Home Alabama" had come on the radio just before we reached the monument, which at the time I thought was just kind of an odd coincidence, but it was somewhat eerie the way that worked out. But so I had this song. I had a CD with the song on it. My grandson and I stopped. I had also been curious. I knew I had a lot of Confederate ancestors from Alabama in the war. I did not know of any that had been at Gettysburg, but I researched some of the surnames and found that there were men of those surnames in the brigade at Gettysburg. So my grandson and I both take a number of pictures. at the monument. Then I turned on the music, and while he took pictures, I read off the names that I had found, that I had connection to. Then I stopped and we both took pictures. This kind of a test, and several orbs appeared in the photos that he took while I was reading the names and the music played. There were no orbs in any of the photos before and after. We immediately drove to Little Round Top. I stopped the van, turned it off. My grandson took several pictures as fast as he could. That's one of the techniques people say you use to catch photographic evidence. And his first photo had a number of orbs that they had tails, almost like comets, and they were all pointing to a spot right in front of where we were. And then the next four pictures had a growing reddish yellowish mist that got bigger with each picture. My grandson had talked to the ghost at Sachs Bridge and was not fazed, but those photographs he kind of flipped out and said, "Grandpa, let's get out of here." At that point, my camera would not function at all. This is a different camera than the trip before. This camera also has not behaved that way at any other time. So when I got home, then I started researching my family ties and found out that my great-great-grandfather and a great-great-great-uncle were both in the 15th Alabama and fought at Little Round Top. My great-great-grandfather was captured. My great-great-great-uncle survived. I would not have done that research had those things at Gettysburg not happened.
Mm-hmm. So, Don, where do you go from here?
Well, right now I am pursuing the book on the 107th Ohio, and it's going to be something different than I've ever done. I've written straight Civil War history. I've written the paranormal books tying in with the Civil War. This book, I'm going to explain things that I have had happen at Gettysburg, what it led to, and it will be very much a straight history of the 107th Ohio at both Chancellorsville and Gettysburg, and the trials that they went through because they were German, and how I was led to look into these trials. And I plan to continue more. I'm looking to do a book about a particular farmhouse and surrounding land outside of Gettysburg that was a Confederate field hospital. Mm-hmm. I have been able to do paranormal investigations there several times and never failed to have some pretty amazing results. So I may just do a book on that particular site, its history, and the paranormal that is investigations uncover there.
All right. So, Don, where can people find your books and learn more about you?
You can learn more about me. I actually have a couple of websites. One called ImetAGhost.com. That deals with the paranormal side of things, and then my publishing company, my wife and I do, is Faded Banner Publications, and that's fadedbanner.com. That links to the other website. They link back and forth, and you can learn about really all the areas that I write about. As far as the books, if a bookstore doesn't carry it, you should be able to order them with no problem, or Amazon carries them, or you can order them from those websites.
Fantastic. Thanks, Don, for coming on and sharing with us about your books and your experiences at Gettysburg. And so I really do appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on. I do like to talk, and as I said earlier, kind of spread the word.
Absolutely. So stay on the line. I will get with you after the show, and I'll coordinate some things with you. And I'm going to make a few announcements, and then I'll be right with you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, so that was Don Allison sharing his books and experiences with us about Gettysburg. It has been an absolute pleasure to have him, and stay tuned here shortly. We will have an update for Paranormal Relief Project. That's going to be coming out on a separate episode later on today. So make sure you watch for that. We thank you guys for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
If you enjoyed our show tonight, head on over to Paranormal Engaged on Facebook and stay up to date on the latest news. And don't forget to click that like button. To find more about upcoming shows and guest information, stop by www.paranormalengaged.com. Paranormal Engaged can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and can be played on Alexa with a Podbean skill.